The strangest secret is that you become what you think about most of the time. So the question is, what do you think about most of the time? Successful people have goals. They write them down and they work on them every day. Now, what I've found over and over again, the whole idea you become what you think about, your beliefs. If you believe that you are destined to be a big success, then you will be.
Welcome.
Wonderful.
To this episode of the Brian Tracy Experience. My co-host and sister, Christina, Tracy-Stein. So welcome, Dad. The Brian Tracy is here and live. Got a fun little episode for you today. To keep it casual, Dad, how was your week? How's your week going?
Well, if you're asking me, I was doing a coaching call with some of my clients, and we're asking the question, what is our purpose, basically, in coaching, in business development? And I said, right off the top of my head, our purpose is to improve the quality of life of people in their relationships and in their financial life. That's our whole goal. Everything we do, write, speak, everything is to help people to enjoy more the quality of life and the quality of their relationships, and faster. Faster is our favorite word. So instead of waiting 5 years, maybe you can wait 5 days. Maybe you can change in 5 minutes. So that's our goal. And we throw a lot of water, a lot of stuff against the wall, hoping that some will stick. And so I'm going to give you one little piece of advice, my friends who are here, is if you hear something good, write it down. You'll hear me say this, write it down, capture it. Napoleon Hill said, capture the idea and write it down. In other words, reach up. It shoots across the mental sky, grab it, and commit it to paper. Well, yes. if you have a clear goal of something that you want to be, do, have, and so on, you're going to start getting ideas. They're going to go through your mind, and one idea can change your life forever. So, like Dr. Pope visiting as a kind of traveler, and finally going back and dedicating his whole life. When Dr. Pope came back to Africa, and this was the same with eye doctors from Japan, when Dr. Pope came back to Africa, the word went out all the way up through Jungle Telegraph, all the way up the Uwaway River into the heart of Africa. There's a pediatrist at the doctor's hospital. There's bring your children. What would people do? And then they heard there was an expert in cataract removal, which was a major problem in Africa because of the environment. And the word went out. There's a cataract specialist going to be in the hospital of Le Docteur. They always call them Le Docteur for 6 weeks. And then people would pick up their family members and put them in canoes and row down the river to Lamborghini, to the doctor's village. And we worked there. I mean, we sat there and they got stories that were read later, but it was a Japanese guy. And how did he get there? His Dr. Schweitzer heard about him and called him and said, please come. And that's it. He closed his practice, everything he could. He was irresistible. So then there were something like hundreds and hundreds of people with eye cataracts. My father had an eye cataract, and he went to the best specialist. He was in the hospital for 6 days, and all kinds of. Here, they had over 2,000. And so what they did is they laid them out on the ground, on beds, and this specialist and he had nurses who knew what to do, follow up. He'd go from person to person. Take 7 days to do in Tokyo. Here he was doing one after another. So he trained his assistants to come in and do the bandaging and the cauterizing. He did something like 2,000 cataract operations, and then they get back in their canoes and they row. Whatever you choose as a mission, you would love to do. Napoleon Hill said, if you find a job that you love to do, you'll never work again for the rest of your life. And all you want to do is get better so you can do it at a higher level.
Another book called Being Mortal, and it's 10 times more successful. It's got 47,000 reviews on Amazon.
Wow. about the checklist, Michael. So you said that if you create that checklist and you can follow the process to achieve the same results, it's also, right, when you check something off a list, right, you complete the task. So you create your list, complete the task, you get a boost of dopamine because it feels rewarding, which then gives you more motivation. So
one of the things that Galandi talks about a hospital, he was an emergency doctor, probably still is an emergency doctor, and that's where this book came from. He found people were brought in from accidents and things like that to this hospital, and 80% of them were dying. So they went back in and they looked at the steps necessary from the time person was brought in, what was supposed to happen. And you know what? Nobody, I do this and I do that, and doctor this and doctor that, and the driver that. Nobody was clear, and they weren't clear in the order. And these people were dying like flies. So what they did is something very simple. They sat down and they said, now what are the steps that we take? And they wrote them all down, and then they put a checklist and a signature. So the person came in, the first thing they got was a list attached to their chest, and then every single person followed the list, and the casualty rate dropped 90% just by having a checklist. And when you read that book, there's story after story after story. When you read that book, it's amazing lives that were saved because people followed the checklist. Now let's jump ahead. Peter Drucker said it takes 7 years to be successful when you start a new business. It takes 7 years. The first 2 years, you're just struggling. You're racing against time because the first 2 years is when you survive or not. And 90% of new businesses fail in the first 2 years. Why? Just run out of money, and nobody will lend them anymore. And imagine an airplane heading toward the ground, and you're pulling back on the stick to get the plane to catch back up. That's what you're doing in the first 2 years. You're stopping the airplane from crashing. Then you start to actually earn more profit than it's costing you to be in business, and the plane starts to go up. And now, for the next 2 years, you pay back the money that you borrowed in the first 2 years. And so finally you hit 4-year mark, you're at break even. What you have to do is put on the brakes, stop, and install systems, sales systems, financial systems, delivery systems. If you don't have systems, what happens? These are the 3 times where you can go bankrupt. Number 1 is when you start. Number 2 is when you hit the 2-year mark and you don't put in systems. And so now you do, and everything starts to move faster and smoother. Fewer mistakes, more profit. Then you have the next 3 years. That's when you take off velocity. This is when you start to really make money doing this. It's called serial entrepreneurship, and it's my love expression of 2025. Serial entrepreneurship means that once you start a business and you get it so it's making money, you start another business even before this business is perfect. And then you see another business. And what you do throughout your life is you're looking for opportunities to sell stuff to people at a profit. And if you do that, what you do is you keep learning how to do it. You keep trying new things. You get more research, more information before you start. But the wonderful thing is that you get smarter and smarter and smarter, and you recognize business opportunities that you hadn't seen before, and you know how to turn them into money from looking at a new business opportunity on top of the one you're already working with.
Well, I think we have a good question. It says, please elaborate on the book, Believe It to Achieve It.
Yeah.
Brian, why don't you talk about how important it is to believe something is possible before you can actually believe that it's possible for you to achieve the same thing?
Well, this is a great question, which I love to answer. The great discovery by Aristotle in 350 BC was that ultimate aim of human life is to be happy. Is everything that you do is ultimately to be happy. You get up in the morning. Why? So you can go to work. Why? So you can earn a living. Why? The greatest discovery in human history, which Earl Nightingale called The strangest secret is that you become what you think about most of the time. So the question is, what do you think about most of the time? Successful people have goals. They're, they write them down and they work on them every day. Now, what I've found over and over again, the whole idea you become what you think about, your beliefs. If you believe that you are destined to be a big success, then you will be. And if you don't believe it, you can wish it, you can hope it, you can think it, you can read books and you go to seminars and listen to audio programs. But if you don't believe that you can be a big success, nothing will really happen. I spent 50 years and easily 50,000 hours studying economics, politics, history, human psychology, philosophy, metaphysics, and so on. I came to a very simple conclusion to try to explain the whole world and the politics of one group versus the politics of another and everything else. And it came down to something for nothing. Everybody, all human beings, genetically structured so that they seek out the very most for the very least in the soonest or the least amount of time. Human beings cannot not do that. It's almost like water. Human beings' nature is water, mine, yours, it's like water flowing. And what happens is if there's a break, the water will flow through the break. So what you have to do is you have to say, what are your beliefs about success? Now, I could give you a simple exercise that will change your life forever.
So one of the way you describe it in the book is something called the expediency principle. And a large portion of your success will be you figuring out how to overcome this compulsion for something for nothing, right?
Well, we call it the E factor. And the E factor is the expediency factor. It says that people are neither good nor bad. They are merely expedient based on their current level of knowledge. I mean, some people are expedient and they do things which are actually really harmful to themselves. As a matter of fact, the 80-20 rule comes and whacks you in the head. 80% of people are living expediently. Now, my book, Something for Nothing, concludes that if you want something for less and less and less, you will always want something for less and less. But what is the very least? And so every human being gravitates like water flowing downhill toward getting the very, very most for the very least, the very easiest possible. Your job, if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, and it's interesting, entrepreneurship, what they call laissez-faire, which means let the people do what they want. Now, entrepreneurship has created more wealth for more billions of people in poor countries than any other fantasy in all of human history. And entrepreneurship is everybody's free to serve other people and to serve it in a cost-effective way so that you make a profit. People are not going to buy from you unless they're absolutely convinced that you are the single, very best, fastest, cheapest, easiest person to buy from. And if somebody else comes along, they will shift in an instant because they can. Human beings cannot not act expediently. And once you understand that, remember, people are neither good nor bad. They're just expedient. And some people have no knowledge. So they engage in behaviors that were very bad for them in the long term. You don't want to get me going on this, but all my studies on leadership, books, tapes, courses, seminars for Fortune 500 companies come back to the fact that leaders have one special quality, among others. One of them, and the one is long-term thinking. Who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, said that basically there's two types of thinking. One is you think fast and you act fast and you do it and you respond instantly. Or in other areas, and it depends upon the area. If you're driving through traffic, you're not supposed to drive slowly. You're supposed to keep up with the traffic. But the other area, the most important area of all, is where you think slowly. And Daniel Kahneman wrote this, and I loved it. It's one of the greatest of concepts, thinking fast and slow. Some things you think fast on. If you're going to order McDonald's, you don't have to spend the afternoon. If you are going to structure a sales offer, if you're going to get married, if you have children, and make an investment, all problems Kahneman comes to is thinking fast when you should be thinking slow.
Is there a decision recently where you've thought really slow about it?
You and I and Christina and Eric and Lanny, we're all involved in a lot of different activities. And there's even more. There's our friends in Florida and things all over Europe. Slow thinking is required because each person has their own opinion or idea, and nobody is right or wrong. It's just that their opinion. And so what you do, if you're really good, is you work in harmony with other people. You assume that each person is doing the very acting correctly. And then you compare opinions, make sure that everybody, as they say, singing off the same song sheet in the choir, we're all in harmony with each other. Why on earth would a person work for anybody else if they thought they were going to be worse off as a result? I mean, that would be like pounding yourself in the face. No, your job is to make it clear that everybody that works with you is going to benefit more by working with you than by working alone.
Yeah.
So I've been in a couple of software startups, and we've been struggling to figure out what to build, what our customers want. And so the best way to do that, Vili, would be to put it in a visual, put it in a deck, and then try to sell it like you already built it. And then if you get a customer, figure out how to build it. Well, there's something that Christina and you and I do that's really similar to MVP. If you don't know what MVP is, it's minimum viable product. It's a product development methodology that's customer driven. So you allow your customers to be your market developers, essentially. They determine your product by their demand and their willingness to buy it. As speakers on stage, I know that, Dad, you've had this experience, and Christina, you've had this experience. You go up there and you're like, I'm going to communicate this really complicated, groundbreaking idea, and you try it out. I'm going to try it a different way. I'm going to try it a different way. And then eventually you see it, and people it clicks. People are engaged. They get it. Their eyes widen. And then you make a little mental note. Okay, I'm going to get rid of all the other stuff I said and just say this next time. Mm-hmm. So it's you're basically, you get to test out your material. I listen to a bunch of podcasts, and there's always stand-up comics on podcasts, and they all do the same thing. They go out and they try and try and try and try until something lands, and then they go, "That's it. That's going to be in my bit." And then they do it again. And sometimes these guys bomb for weeks. And eventually they end up with, 12 or 15 jokes that just land perfect, and they get their timing right, and they go out and they do a set, and it's hilarious. But as speakers, we do the same thing, but we're selling ideas on how to be more productive, how to be more fulfilled, how to get more done, how to sell more stuff.
Well, and so much of that is that people communicate. There's such a range of how people communicate, right? Like some people are very direct in how they communicate, and they're clear with facts and details. And some people are very indirect, and they imply ideas, or they give you half of a sentence and they expect you to know the rest of the sentence. And so, I mean, across the board, whether you're speaking or whether you're in business or whether you're in a relationship, figuring out what is the combination or the correct way to communicate to another person, I think is an art. It's a process. But yeah, when you click, when somebody gets what you're saying, whether it's a customer or a personal relationship, it's like, oh, okay, now we use this way of describing things. This is the effective approach of communicating.
Called Meditations for Mortals by a guy named Oliver Berkman. And he was talking about how everybody's got a backlog of things that they want to read and consume. Like it's an information overload. And this is like the powerful way that you can reposition things with words. He said, stop thinking of it like a bucket and start thinking of it like a river that you can pluck things out of. So it's not a bucket, it's a river. And that's like something that for him, he probably went through lots of iterations on how to communicate that.
So talking about the idea that like you can only hold one idea in your mind at a time. Well, and obviously the three of us are book collectors. For me, whether I read a book or not, each book represents an idea. And so every time I see the book, it reminds me of the idea. And then it's like you can put together a combination of ideas.
That's great. The two things that come to my mind are you and I always talked about this preparation. The top 10 to 20% of people prepare exhaustively. There's a famous story. There was an obscure colonel who worked at a military base in Maryland when World War II started up in Europe. A head of the military at that time decided, with his incredible organizational ability, would direct the war on the ground, and Patton would win it with tanks. And they made that decision in 1935, 36. It took a long time to come to fruition. Anyway, they spent month after month after month planning the Normandy invasion of June 6th, 1944. And there were 186,000 men coordinated from all over the world on ships and camps and everywhere else, and launched the invasion with the full understanding that they could fail. They could lose it all. And fortunately, they were successful. And they asked General Dwight D. Eisenhower later, how important was the planning? The 6 intensive months, 10, 12 hours a day. Well, the first time we hit the beaches, he said the planning was not important in the victory, but the planning was essential to consider all the possibilities. So no matter what happened, we had a backup plan and a backup plan and a backup plan. And so that's how they brought about one of the greatest successes in the history of the world, is all planning, thinking through, changing, being open, and then having a what if scenario. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if they do this? What if they do that? And so in which case we would do this? In which case we would do that? In other words, they thought long term, as leaders do. They thought it was called thinking down the pathway, thinking into the future of what might happen. Jack Welch, the president of IBM, with whom I worked a couple of times, was an incredible executive. This man took a $4 billion company, General Motors, and turned it into a $62 billion company. The man was a genius. He wrote about what he did and everything else. But one of the things he said, if there is a 3% chance that something really bad can go wrong, assume it is going to happen and be fully prepared to deal with it.
It's this idea of planning versus preparation. Planning is thinking ahead, yes, and preparing is action. It's like, actually trying to go and do something and failing and getting better and refining your skills, meeting the right people, raising the money, whatever it happens to be. But there's a point where you have to stop planning, right, and start iterating. And so when do you think that is?
You will know. You can give us the famous 6P line, which is what?
Prior proper preparation prevents poor performance.
So you'll find, for example, Alexander the Great Napoleon, the great generals of history planned and planned and planned and planned and planned and planned and planned. One of the most incredible victories in American history was the Battle of San Jacinto. And this was just shortly after the Alamo had been overrun and 196 men had been killed. They couldn't get supplies. They couldn't get soldiers in there. So now everybody is, the word's pissed. Everybody is angry for what happened to the people of the Alamo.
So Dad, is the short answer to the question planning versus preparation? It's also timing, right? So there's a point where you can plan, you prepare, and then there's a point in time where you have to take action. Christina, can you elaborate on that? Like, can you talk about the psychology behind? I get stuck planning sometimes, or I'm just, and I don't know when to take action. I prepare. What is that about?
First of all, there's fear, right? Like, we get stuck in our comfort zones. And when we're in the comfort zone where it's comfortable and safe and we know what's happening, then, we don't want to change that. It's anytime you do something different, anytime like you're preparing a talk, Michael, or a project, or you want to take action, it's new action. And so because it's new, it's going to create some anxiety. And sometimes we interpret the anxiety as like, oh God, this is bad. Get away from it. It's scary. But as we're in that mode of feeling afraid, right? Because our body's like, stop, don't do this. Just stop where you're at. We're also analyzing and thinking. And like there is something to the saying analysis paralysis, where like when you overthink something, it actually convinces you not to act, because suddenly you're like, oh God, well, it's not perfect and I need to wait till it's perfect. And how do I make it perfect? And then you seek out reasons why it's not perfect, and that is your excuse for not acting.
So how do you tip it so that you act? So you go from thinking to action. Everyone gets stuck in that rut at some point of overanalyzing, right? And you think about all the different contingencies. What's the catalyst? Or do you just need to kind of force yourself to do it after a certain period of time?
Well, I'll say, I think that there's two aspects to it. One is if you can just come up with a tiny like baby step to move, to just kind of start the action, like maybe it's a bigger deal to like jump into it. But if you do something small on the way to the bigger action, it starts the momentum. And once you start the momentum, then it's like, okay, I'm okay. I can take another step. I can take another step. I can take another step. And suddenly there's momentum. And then you start working towards the goal and achieving the action. And then the other thing is that I have found is unknown is scary, right? Like when you don't want to take action, it's because it's terrifying. You don't want to fail. You don't want to be rejected. You don't know how it's going to work. And so there is self-talk, right? You have to be like, okay, this is
yourself up. Yeah.
It might not work. I might fail, but if it doesn't work, then I'm going to learn how not to do it. And next time I'll do it a different way. And, like I like to say, you have to recruit your inner cheerleader or your coach to be like, you got this. It's scary and it might not work, but you're okay. Do it.
Something you just said actually reminded me. There's a gentleman named Stephen Pressfield, and he wrote a book called The War of Art. Confused by the art of war, the war of art. He's a novelist and a writer. He helps artists overcome, what he calls the resistance. It's like that internal resistance. And he basically describes he's like, I've created a ritual that helps me overcome the resistance. And so he'll hop into his pickup truck and he'll drive to this office where there's like very little distraction, and he'll sit down in front of his computer or typewriter or whatever, and he'll just set a clock for 1 hour.
Yeah.
And he'll sit there for an hour, and if he doesn't write a single word, it's like, fine. I came, I sat down, I showed up. Occasionally the words will just flow, right? And he'll write pages and pages and pages. The third thing is just create a ritual where you just kind of go, you hop into your figurative truck, you drive to your figurative office with few distractions, and you sit there and you just wait for what he calls it, the muse. Some people call it divine inspiration, or sometimes it's an inspiration or an insight. But the creating of the rituals, that's really helped me, because it takes away all the pressure, because really it's like, well, all you have to do, Michael, is just show up. You can prepare and then you show up.
Yeah.
And when you show up, I feel like that's all the magic happens. What is it? 80% of success is showing up. I think it's actually closer to 95%. I would say 95% of success in life is just showing up. It's just going and being there. It's doing the thing. There's a motivational speaker named Dan Clark. How do you show up for somebody who's like grieving, somebody who's passed away, and everybody is so resistant because there's like, I don't know what I would say. I don't know how I could say anything that would help comfort them. And Dan Clark had this line, and he's like, if you show up, you don't have to say anything. Totally. Your presence is your message.
I want to add something, Michael, and it's not totally relevant to being creative or having a project, but I think we can expand a little bit. And I'll just say, like, I work with a lot of couples on how to improve their relationships. And one of the things I'm always guiding them to do is to like schedule a window of time together, so that like you're saying, show up, go to the coffee shop, go to the warehouse, so that like the creative flow can come. But I think sometimes in relationships, people need to have space, show up for each other to kind of allow the connection to happen. Because, like there are times when people come together and it's like, okay, we're going on a date, or we're having, we're getting coffee together, and they arrive and they're not necessarily ready to connect. So giving time and creating more space really allows that connection to sort of emerge in a more natural way that feels more, instinctual and intuitive. But it's almost like the creative flow that you're talking about, that you need to make space. You can't be like, be creative. It's 4:00. You have to kind of say, all right, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to, control the circumstances, and I'm going to hope the creative flow arrives. It's very similar with connecting with people, with allowing yourself to sort of be vulnerable and authentic after like discharging the stress or the distraction. There's like a transition that gets you there. So it's an interesting parallel between.
Anyway, I was at a very high level conference in Washington, D.C., and I was speaking just to a friend of mine who is the head of the organization, biggest one in the world. He was saying that, he's so busy, doesn't time to spend at home. He wishes he did. And I said, well, do you have a date night? He said, that's where you plan a date night every week in advance. And then you take and you go out for dinner and you just stay by yourself. I've never heard of that before. A conference in Washington, I was talking to him. He said, from that day, he said, we've had date night every week. And so that you had that same experience. We've all had that same experience. We need to get alone with the most important people in our lives. And by the way, you and I, each of us have had date night.
If I'm working with a couple and they take one piece of advice, it's have a weekly date. And I actually do it with my kids. Every week I have a date with each of my kids where it's one-on-one, because I think there's something about time is your most valuable asset. And so when you give your time to the people that matter to you, it shows them that they matter. It's also such an incredible way to cultivate the connection in the relationship. Like when you're hanging out as a family or in a group, or I know a lot of people who go on double dates where they only go with other couples to dinner or other couples on things. And it's never just about them, like they're not focusing on each other because they're entertaining the other couple or there's cross conversation. And it's so important to cultivate the connection in the relationship, whether it's professional or personal, just having that time together and dedicating the space to getting to know the other person, because we change so fast.
One of the things which I mentioned before is that I would ask you, and ask you, Michael, I'd ask, what books have you read that you would recommend unhesitatingly?
That's 3 that are my go-to books that I believe are core to spiritual development. One is Khalil Gibran, 100% The Prophet is really great. And then the Tao Te Ching, the one translated by Stephen Miller.
One of the things about reading is that the person who reads has a tremendous advantage over those who do not. The person who does not read is no better than a person who cannot read. So you'll find that, and it's hard to do because we're so busy, but a book written by a person with years of experience can give you an idea that saves your life, that changes your life, that makes you happy, that makes you rich. I mean, the ideas are out there. My philosophy is always there are ideas, one or more, that are going to make you rich or richer, but you don't know where they are or what they are. So what you have to do is you have to flood your mind. You have to oversaturate your mind with ideas. You have to, like a good movie, is trying to find this professional killer, but they are doing every single conceivable type of technological search, and they find her, and you never know. You could be one step from a huge success. You could be just one step away. And there's a line that I read when I started young in success, and it said, many people right up to the edge of success, and then they stop and give up and go back. If they had just taken one more step, they would be a big success today. Well, I always tell that story because every single person who is successful just kept one step at a time, and you only can succeed by failing. And so therefore, when you fail, just say, how can I learn from this temporary problem? What can it teach me? How can I be better in the future? And then remember, you could be one step away. You never know when you are one step away. So that's your thought. Well, I could be one step away, so I'll take one more step. I'll take one more step. And I'll take one more step. And I will never, 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 what? Never,
Give
never.
up. Believe it to achieve it. That idea is you have to believe that you've got to just take that one more step. You've got to just keep moving, that something great will happen if you just keep trying.
And the only way you can build belief in yourself is by taking action.
Yes.
You have to do something that you would not have done.
Yes.
And moves you forward. The first time is hard, and second time is hard. But as Goethe said, the German philosopher, everything in terms of habits, everything is hard before it's easy. And one is hard, and the other is harder still, and the other is harder than you can imagine. But there's no easy. There's only hard and more hard and harder of all. So therefore, don't expect it to be easy.
How can I shift into a stronger business mindset without losing my core vision?
The most important word that you'll ever learn is in business, in life, results. Results. Results is you get paid for achieving results. Now, here's something else that comes to me after years, is that all of success comes from job completion, not from job working on, not from job talking about, not from job planning and organizing and discussing. Everything is completion. And Solzhenitsyn wrote about this in one of his great pieces of writing. He said, it's astonishing the great majority of people will take a task to the 95% point and then go out for lunch and get back to it next week or never. They can take it to the 95% point. Your job is always to complete the task. Now, then that takes us to Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger's advice is you can't complete every task. So you have to start with the one task that can help you to achieve your overall goals faster than any other single goal. What is it? Now, this is a thing you need to think about. Sometimes the first answer you think about is really not the right answer. Ask your wife, ask your husband, ask your coworker. And so I said, this is my thinking. What do you think? Sometimes people can say, this, do this, actually do this or do that. You do it, it changes your life, makes you rich, saves you 10 years, getting to the same point. So you have to become a sponge for new information, sponge for new ideas. All the top people, read the books, listen to the programs, attend the seminars, interact with other successful people, ask them questions. I have a friend who started off with nothing and is now worth about $1 billion. And he and I talk a lot. And he was asking me about a really important decision he has to make. He's 81 years old and he's got a piece of property. He paid $1,200 an acre for it 40 years ago and kept it. Today it's worth $2 million an acre. And the owners on both sides want to develop all the property as a single massive shopping center on the freeways. And he was asking me my advice. He phoned me cold and he told me about this deal and it's millions of dollars. And should he stay in or stay out? Should he sell everything or keep an interest and so on? You can imagine my advice. Are you kidding? I mean, I'm a pretty smart person, but I'm not really into $100 million multi-complexity decisions. So what advice did I give him? And this is the advice that concluded is the most important advice of all. Listen to your heart. How do you do that? You go, as Michael was saying, you go and sit quietly outside or in your living room. No cigarettes or music or distractions or anything else. Just sit perfectly quietly for 30 minutes. Now, here's what I've discovered is for the first 25 minutes, your mind will be turbulent. You just be thinking about this and thinking about that. And you have an active mind. Everybody has an active mind. However, at about 23 to 25 minutes, this, by the way, has been taught worldwide for thousands of years. At about 25 minutes, your mind will suddenly, a bucket of water that's full of mud, churn it all up and you can't see anything. But you let it sit there and the mud, it sinks to the bottom and the water becomes clear and drinkable. And that's what happens to your mind when you sit there for 25 minutes. The first 25 is turbulent, and then suddenly your mind clears and you start to get a river of superconscious activity. You have to have a piece of paper handy, because you're going to start having ideas. I could do this, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that. The great majority of human beings, high 90s, maybe 97%, have never sat alone in a room by themselves for 30 minutes. And you know what? Harvard did a study. The 3% who do sit and think earn 10 times as much as people who don't, because they make better decisions, take better actions, and complete more important.
Dad or Christina, do you guys have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap up this episode?
I think, to me, we have to believe in yourself, and it sounds like you have to create space to connect, space for creativity, space to get to know yourself. As Brian just said, 30 minutes alone and you get a download for your super conscious mind. Really honor that for you and your life and you and your relationship. Take the time to connect with your creative expression. Take the time to connect with the people in your lives, and take the time to receive whatever might come to you. But you can only really do that if you make the space for it. So that would be my closing remark for you guys.
My thought would be a repetition. It's exactly what you said. You become what you think about most of the time. So what you do is you also become what you say to yourself. And you can say all the time. The top one is, I like myself. I like myself. I like myself. I like myself. That's self-esteem, self-concept, self-love, inner power, self-confidence. Whenever you're feeling anything negative, cancel it. The second one is, I can do it. The third one is, I never give up. And the fourth statement is,
I believe in myself. I believe in myself.
Yes. What do you say to yourself? They say the most important words in the world are the words that you say to yourself and believe. Now, the interesting thing is, if you started to say to yourself, I am a millionaire, the first time your mind rejects it. And then what you do is you cancel by saying, yes, I'm a millionaire. And you know something? I know from both of you, because of the homes that you own, that you're both millionaires. So if I were to say to you, you become what you think about and what you say to yourself, that's not possible. Of course it is. It is the reason for success and happiness and great relationships and wonderful kids. What you say to yourself and believe. And the first time you say something really good to yourself, you won't believe it. Your mind will reject it like a machine. It'll spit it back out. You just put it back in again, and you'll reject it, and you keep putting it back in, and then the rejection stops, and then you start to think, well, if I was to become a millionaire, what would I do? And your life changes forever. Now you're thinking in terms of what actions you can take to start moving yourself one step closer. And nothing can stop you after that. People come from all over the world, from 192 countries to the US. And one of the things that they want to do is become wealthy, so that they can be free, so that they can provide a wonderful life. And it's easier today than it has ever been in all of human history for our listeners to become financially successful in every other area.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Christina. And of course, thanks, Dad. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your week.